Phar Lap is the most iconic racehorse in Australasia. Born and bred in New Zealand, but trained by an Australian, his story is told to school kids to this day. He gave hope to Australia in the early years of the Great Depression. His 1930 Melbourne Cup Carnival is legendary stuff, winning a race on all 4 days of the carnival. The Melbourne Stakes, which later became the McKinnon and is now the Champion Stakes on Derby Day, the Melbourne Cup 3 days later, the Linlithgow Stakes on Oaks Day a couple of days later, and the CB Fisher Plate on Stakes Day 2 days after that. 4 races won in a week, something that will never happen again. Phar Lap in life and in death is one of Australia's greatest sporting heroes. Yet Phar Lap was not the horse many would have expected to do this. In fact, Phar Lap was a horse that wasn't getting any results until one race changed the course of his career, the fortunes of his connections and of Australian horse racing. Phar Lap went from a horse that was well beaten in every race he was running in to being a sure price favourite for the Melbourne Cup very quickly. Here is how it happened, how it changed Phar Lap's career, and how we could honour this race today. Phar Lap, like many great champions, did not start out in the surroundings that immediately screamed one of the greatest racehorses who will ever live. His parents were, to put it charitably, well-bred underachievers. He was sired by the imported stallion Night Raid and was out of entreaty. Night Raid was a failure on English race courses, failing to record a victory in 6 starts, his best a third in a nursery selling plate. The colt's disappointed owners were only too glad to sell Night Raid for only £120 to trainer J. McGowan. He in turn sold Night Raid along with another stallion named Cymeric to Sydney trainer Peter Keith, £950 for the pair. Night Raid had some races in Australia, but fared only a bit better. He won 1 race for Keith before being sold to Sydney owner A. Patrick Wade, for whom he dead heated for first in a race, after which, while trained at Melbourne, he broke down. After this, he was sold to New Zealander Alec Roberts and stood at Kautina until Roberts built his new stud at Di-Mauro on New Zealand's South Island. As a stallion, Night Raid proved successful. During his stud career, he sired Knightley, winner of the New Zealand Derby and Canterbury Cup, and other races in New Zealand, and the AJC Randwick Plate and VRC CB Fisher Plate in Australia. Nightbeam, winner of the AJC Metropolitan and other races. Lady Graceful, winner of the New Zealand Oaks, and Night March, who I'll talk more about later. In Treaty, a black mare was foaled in 1920. She broke down after 1 race and was retired to the breeding shed. She was sired by important Winky, a full brother to 1,000 Guineas victor Winky Pop. So while Night Raid had some success with his progeny, there was no way anyone in their right mind thought he could sire one of the greatest racehorses, and certainly not out of a mare who had only run once and broke down. Phar Lap was foaled on October the 4th, 1926. He was destined to be sold as a yearling. Accordingly, he was offered as lot 41 at the New Zealand yearling sales at Trentham Racecourse in January of 1928. The colt was purchased by Hugh Telford, the brother of New Zealand trainer Harry Telford, for 160 guineas for the account of David J. Davis, a Russian-born American citizen who had come to Australia and amassed a modest fortune as an importer of fine china and silver. Harry Telford had served a useful apprenticeship with the many times leading trainer, both in New Zealand and Australia, Dink Mason, who trained the legendary Gloaming, who before establishing his own stable in New South Wales. The unnamed colt was shipped across the Tasman Sea to join Telford's stable yard in Australia. When he disembarked from the ship, the chestnut was thin and his head was covered in pimples. As a foal and yearling, he was a large, gangly specimen, seemingly more well suited to steeplechasing than running on the flat. Davis was not happy with having to spend anything on such a horse. He was only persuaded to keep him by entering into agreement with Telford, in which the latter would lease the colt for 3 years, paying for feed and entry fees. Davis was to get a third of any purse money won. Appeased by this arrangement, Davis left the homely horse in Telford's care, not expecting the colt to amount to anything worthwhile. This would turn out to be a good thing for Telford. The colt was given to a young man named Tommy Woodcock. The two became nearly inseparable, with Woodcock affectionately calling the horse Bobby. Bobby was gelded, the thought being such a large backward colt, would benefit from the procedure. He eventually grew to stand over 17 hands with a girth of 79 inches. The gelding was named Phar Lap, which is the Thai word for lightning, but it was far from lightning fast at the start of his career, and racegoers and the connections must have been seeing the irony in the name at the start. The first time Phar Lap appeared in Australian media was on the 12th of February 1929, when the Sydney Morning Herald and the Daily Telegraph published the acceptances for next Saturday's races. It wouldn't be the last time, by any matter or means, Phar Lap would be mentioned in print. Phar Lap's first race was on the 23rd of February 1929 in a handicap over 5.5 furlongs in a field of 13. The horse that would go on to win 14 races in a row ran last in that field of 13 at his first start. His second, third and fourth start also resulted in unplaced outcomes, spread over 37 days. On the 27th of April 1929, at his last start as a 2-year-old, Phar Lap took his maiden win in a handicap at Randwick. When he returned at the end of the winter 1929, Phar Lap still wasn't making much headway, unplaced in his first 4 races at 3. From starts 3 to 8, Phar Lap's only experience in races was at 6 or 7 furlongs. When sent to races at longer distances is when Phar Lap showed glimpses of what was to come. 4th in the Warwick Stakes, which is now the Wing Stakes, over a mile, followed by a second over 9 furlongs in the Chelmsford Stakes. This second really changed everything. It was that dashing second in the Chelmsford where people began to take notice. On the 16th of September, 2 days later, an article is published in the Northern Star from Lismore, New South Wales, which mentions Phar Lap 7 times, and the winner of the race, Mollison, 8 times. Mollison had got up on the inside and won by half a length, with Phar Lap beating third home by 3 lengths. The next day in the Lord Sesson Examiner mentions Phar Lap as a Melbourne Cup chance. This is a 3-year-old gelding that has still only won 1 race. The author does note that the Chelmsford had form in the previous couple of decades of its winners going on to win or place in the race that stops the nation, so it wasn't completely outlandish. Still, I imagine, as has happened since time immemorial, many average Joe readers would have got very upset at the people paid to write and have opinions on sport for a living. I'm sure some readers would have thought this Phar Lap has won nothing, beaten nothing, it's not a chance in the Derby, let alone the Cup against the older horses. So when did that change? Where did it all turn around? The answer is Phar Lap's next race, the 1929 Rosehill Guineas, held a week after the Chelmsford on the 21st of September 1929. The Rosehill Guineas was first held in 1910 and was initially held over 7 furlongs. By the time Phar Lap was 3, the race had well since transitioned to 1 1/8 miles, approximately 1,800 metres. In 1948 it was up to a mile and a quarter, or about 2,000 metres. It has been held over 2,000 metres since Australian racing transferred to the metric system. It is the second leg of the never-thought-about Australian Triple Crown of the Randwick Guineas, which replaced the Canterbury Guineas, Rosehill Guineas and the Australian Derby. Unlike the US and even other countries, it is never talked about, largely because what most people would define as the 3 biggest 3-year-old races, in addition to the Australian Derby, are the Caulfield Guineas and the Victorian Derby. And since these Sydney races have, since the time of Phar Lap, been moved to the autumn instead of the early spring, they're now held in 2 separate calendar years. Anyway, in Hobart's The Mercury, an article published had a full paragraph on Phar Lap, noting his fast finish, and believed the additional distance would certainly help him. The 1929 Rosehill Guineas over 9 furlongs was the chance to show that. Phar Lap had carried 7 stone 6 pounds in his last 3 starts, but in the Guineas he would carry 8 stone 5. While some racing observers may very well have scoffed at Phar Lap's chances for the Derby before this race, it wouldn't be the case after this race. Phar Lap settled in 5th after the first 2 furlongs, but was moved up along the rails with a mile to go, where he was checked. Phar Lap backers would have been worried about if a run was ever going to open up, but it did at the top of the straight, and after hitting the front he never looked like he was going to get beat. Interestingly, a review in the Sydney races in Melbourne's Argus mentions another horse side by Night Raid. That is the aforementioned Night March, spelled as 2 different words, which is interesting. The Trove archives show that the newspapers of the day couldn't decide whether to spell his name as 1 word or 2, though in history, 1 word won out. He had won the New Zealand Derby in 2,000 guineas in 1928, and these 2 sons of Night Raid would be the horses that would continue to dominate the spring of 1929. Phar Lap continued to go from strength to strength, winning the Derby, Craven Plate, beating Mollison, who beat him in the Chelmsford, and then the VRC Derby. Night March had won the Cox Plate before the 2 faced off in the Melbourne Cup. Phar Lap carried 7 stone 6 and ridden by the legendary Bobby Lewis, refused to settle and finished 3rd as Night March became the first horse to win the Cox Plate and Melbourne Cup double. Phar Lap would resume to winning ways and famously took out the Cox Plate and Melbourne Cup double in 1930, overtaking Night March as Night Raid's greatest progeny. The rest, as they say, is history. Phar Lap went on to inspire the nation throughout the darkest, saddest times of the Great Depression. Phar Lap had winning streaks of 9, 14 and 8. 37 wins and 51 starts is Phar Lap's career record, but starting at the Rosehill Guineas, Phar Lap won 36 of 40 run races. Those 5 non-wins were 2 seconds, 2 thirds and an 8th in the 1931 Melbourne Cup, where he was beaten by the handicapper. He, of course, went to the US in 1932, though contrary to what you might read, Phar Lap's sole run outside of Australia occurred across the border in Mexico.
And the glorious total of $332,000 worth of winnings. It's a great debut for the Australian beauty, Phar Lap, one of the handsomest horses ever seen on an American track. A little temperamental, but what star isn't? In one race, he's proved himself, and how the fans love it. A real champion and a new racetrack idol.
His sudden death not long after has ensured Phar Lap has not dropped out of the imagination of the broader public like other great champions of the turf, such as Carbine and Tulloch have. Bruce McAvaney is one of Australia's greatest sporting commentators. Many of his commentaries are stuff of legends, including calling Empire Rose's 1988 Melbourne Cup, which you can watch on this channel.
Empire Rose a half in front, Netsky won't make it, and the big mare wins! Empire Rose beats Netsky!
Every year when covering the Group 2 Phar Lap Stakes, he always makes the point that Australia's most iconic racehorse does not have a Group 1 named after him. That is a joke, it is ridiculous, and quite frankly embarrassing of a situation for Australian racing to be in. In 2021, on the Channel 7 broadcast before the Group 2 Phar Lap Stakes, and I remember watching it live and hearing him say this at the time, McAvaney made a great suggestion to rename the Rosehill Guineas as the Phar Lap Guineas. McAvaney noted how Australia had many Group 1s already, but said, "I was thinking about the Rosehill Guineas, and it was Phar Lap's first significant win and the launching pad for everything that followed." McAvaney also suggested moving the race to Golden Slipper Day. Now, I'm not suggesting that has to happen, but the first suggestion for mine is perfect. Now, as seen by the long battle to get the Everest to the Group 1 status it very quickly deserved, it is always a bit of an uphill battle to get the Pattern Committee to get things right. However, this is worth getting right. And here is the reason why. The late 2020s and early 2030s will mark a century since the Big Red gave so much comfort to this country, and as we live in times of division and economic uncertainty, we should have a Group 1 each year to remind us of this champion. A race for 3-year-olds who will have great careers on the racetrack ahead of them, and for the colt, quite possibly its stud as well. Phar Lap will always be a part of Australian history. Not even the anti-racing folks and their terrible arguments will change that. Check out this video for me debunking said arguments. School kids will learn his story for many generations to come. Failure to do so would be a great failure of the Australian education and storytelling. His mysterious death means there are many levels of fascination with one of the world's greatest racehorses. Just like Secretariat, Phar Lap's heart after his death was found to be much larger than the average thoroughbred racehorse. The average weighs in somewhere between 3 and 4 kilograms. Phar Lap's weighed in at 6.45 kilograms, more than 1.5 times bigger. His heart was donated to the Australian Institute of Anatomy, where it was on show for many years. This is an image of that display and what it looked like. Phar Lap's heart is the one on the bottom right and sat beside the much smaller heart of an army horse for reference. His heart became one of the key collections of the National Museum of Australia in 1980. This is where it resides at the time of recording, there in Canberra. I got the chance to see it along with a wider horse racing display back in 2019 as part of a school camp. Phar Lap impacted so many people in both Australia and New Zealand, and that has been reflected in where his remains have ended up. In addition to his heart sitting in Canberra, his mounted hide went to the Museum of Victoria in Melbourne, and the skeleton went to the National Museum of New Zealand in Wellington. In 2010, the Melbourne Cup was run for the 150th time. Racing Victoria's handicapper, Greg Carpenter, did the hard work of selecting the best 24 horses from the race's history and assigning them weights. Then a panel of 22 determined the order, and carrying top weight, it was the Red Terror who saluted.
There's no doubt he's the greatest. Look at him, Big Red. He's got to the line over another absolute champion in Carbine in second place, and then the great mare, Mackay Diva, just about a length away in third. What a fantastic race, what a brilliant call, and what a great idea that was. But I don't think it's any surprise to anyone, Bruce, that the Great Red, the Big Red, has won the race.
Gee, have a look at old Jack and the Diva ahead, the three of them. It gives you a tingle, doesn't it? I almost feel like they're with us today, don't you, on this 150th?
So how good was Phar Lap? Those who've watched my horse racing videos would know I feel this is a question that's basically impossible to answer, at least to answer fairly, so most of the time I would just leave them alone. I don't even think it's worthy to even start pondering it. So I won't end this video with my own words, but rather someone else's. I'll leave you with the words of Francis Doon, a long-time American racing official and a veteran steward in New York. He was once asked, after Secretariat's Triple Crown success, whether Man O' War or Secretariat, the two great Americans, was the greatest racehorse of all time. Neither, he said. I saw Phar Lap.